This time it's the Beagle, possibly BSA's worst motorcycle. Before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. It really does help us create future videos. Now the story here really starts in the late 50s. Honda have released the Cub, and that's becoming very popular with its 49cc overhead valve engine. BSA's range had, at the bottom at least, the venerable two-stroke Bantam. But by this period the engine had grown out to 175cc's. And there was another problem with the Bantam, namely that it was a two-stroke. Not everybody is a big fan of two-strokes, some people actively dislike them. Over on the continent, small Italian manufacturers were producing beautiful four-stroke, small capacity motorcycles. These had lovely styling and had very up-to-date designs, but they were rather expensive, to put it mildly. The Bantam, of course, was very cheap and cheerful, but the company realised that they could create a smaller capacity four-stroke and give it nice continental styling. They could have a hit on their hands. By this point this was particularly important because the UK market was contracting rapidly, so having a machine which would broaden the range and have more appeal outside of Great Britain would seem like a pretty damn good idea. In 1960 Edward Turner would tour the Japanese factories, and what he saw there would inspire the development of what would eventually be BSA's Beagle. Andy Turner is largely credited with the development of the Beagle project. Now Turner is a man who really came to prominence in the 1930s with the development of Ariel Square 4 and of course even more famously Triumph Speed Twin and Tiger 100 models at the end of the 30s. These had of course completely changed the market in Great Britain and were unsurprisingly massive commercial successes. But while the Parallel Twins were indeed seminal motorcycles for the industry, Turner was not without his odd bum design. And there's no doubt that during his career he did produce the odd turkey, although the phrase dog perhaps would be more appropriate here. From flimsy frames to dodgy scooters, he certainly had his bad days, with his double overhead cam 350 prototype being a very stark example. Here was a machine which was stylish and surprisingly fast, but it also handled terribly and the engine grenaded itself if pushed hard, courtesy of an all too flimsy bottom end. Essentially it would go quite quickly, but not for very long at all. And it could be said that the insistence of the management to push through this design did much to seal the fate of BSA Triumph. But of course, we're a decade ahead of ourselves here. Back in 1960, Turner wanted to design a small four-stroke engine. And in fact there would be two of them, one of 75cc's and one of 50cc's to power the Ariel Pixie step-through. Now just as he'd done for the C15 a few years earlier, Turner would use the Triumph Tiger Cub as a starting point for the engine design, although in fact the final design would be quite different. But problematically, the engine would retain many of the weaker features of the Tiger Cub engine. And while the smaller engine of course would have smaller, explosions inside of it, there would be quite a few more of them. Smaller engines, after all, have to rev a lot harder to gain any real performance. The 75cc BSA Beagle made its first appearance at the Earls Court Show in 1962, with production starting in late 1963. The Beagle had many modern elements to it. It had a pressed steel frame from which the motor was hung without frontal support, rather like Honda's Cub, and at the rear there was a Japanese-style pressed steel swinging arm. The mudguards were stylish and well valanced to offer good practical weather protection, and overall the machine had a fresh European look to it, with the only familiar element being the BSA sourced petrol tank, which would take a long time to empty given the frugal nature of its small four-stroke motor. And if you wanted even more groovy styling, there was always the Ariel Pixie with its 50cc engine and stylish pressed steel setup. The Beagle's engine was of 75cc's and was a four-stroke overhead valve single. The engine had a bore and stroke of 48 by 42 and compression ratio was 9.5 to 1. Carburation was taken care of by an AMAL Type 19 carburettor, with peak power claimed at 5 horsepower. Not a huge amount, but not bad for a 75cc commuter of the period. Unusually for a British machine, primary drive was taken care of by gears rather than a chain. This then fed to a 4-speed gearbox in a period when many smaller machines only ran 3 speeds, and sometimes less. The engine also ran a wet sump, with the pan being simple to remove in case of oil changes. Electrically there was an AC flywheel generator, which powered direct lighting. A dry battery was supplied purely to provide parking lighting. Sparks were produced courtesy of a flywheel magneto, which did not require a battery. This was all fairly standard kit for mopeds of the period, including many of those produced in Japan incidentally. Small and compact, the little Beagle weighed in at just around 140 pounds dry. So despite the engine's modest performance, it could still get up around 50 miles an hour. But more importantly, with a 2-gallon fuel tank, you could probably get around 200 miles out of a tank. So small, frugal, with some stylish design elements and some new thinking. Just what went wrong with the Beagle? Well, perhaps slightly predictably, it is of course that little motor, and very specifically that little motor's lubrication system. The pump itself's okay, it's the basic piston pump, or at least half of it, found on their usual dry sump engines. It's pretty basic and old fashioned, but it's generally up to the task. At the bottom end runs on 3 separate bearings, a needle roller bearing and 2 roller bearings. The big end bearing, however, was very similar to that of the Tiger Cub, making use of a plain bearing which are lubricated by holes in the crankshaft journal. This relied on a very close fit between the feed holes and the crankcase casing in which it rotated. So any wear in the casing or the crankshaft would reduce in a severe drop in oil pressure at the big end and a catastrophic failure of the engine. Worse still, there was no direct oil supply to the top end rocker assembly. It seemed that Turner believed that oil mist, wafting its way through the pushrod tubes from the bottom end, would be sufficient to lubricate the valve gear. Somewhat unsurprisingly, this did not prove to be the case. And it wouldn't take long after the bike's release in late 1963 for the first machines to come back with broken engines. The result, somewhat unsurprisingly, was a commercial disaster for BSA, with only around 4,000 Beagles ever been manufactured. By comparison, the unloved Dandy, BSA's 2-stroke scooter, sold around 25,000 units, and the Bantam somewhere between 1/2 and 250,000 units. Ultimately, Edward Turner would draw a line under the machine and end production in 1965 after just 2 years. And this perhaps just compounded Turner's error. He had designed a machine with a skimped oil supply, and as he'd often done with prototype machines before, had abandoned the project when the problems had begun to emerge. But the fact is, many machines do have problems when they're first produced. Even the CX500, darling of the dispatch ride of the 1970s, did have some problems when it was first introduced. The difference is, Honda took the time to fix them. Turner simply gave up and scrapped the whole thing. And in truth, this really wasn't out of character for him. But while Triumph gave up on a whole sector of the market, Honda would introduce the Sport 65 in 1964. In concept, this was very similar to the Beagle, except of course, Honda got the lubrication system right, and would even find a market for the bike in the United States, not a place traditionally fond of small little runabouts. But Honda, of course, got both the marketing and the execution just right. What other bikes or collections bikes would you like to see us cover in a future video? Maybe you get a bike we can use for a test ride. Either way, get in touch below. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, thank you very much for watching.